Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast. I am UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Fert Derby and Lord Uther. Gentlemen, welcome back to Starfleet Academy headquarters, Starbase 1, wherever we are today. We are talking the finale, the last episode of Star Trek's original series run, Turnabout, Intruder. And this episode comes in at a weird time. And for weird reasons, I don't really want to step on toes here, so I'm going to turn this right over to Fert Derby. What's going on with episode 24 of season 3?
Thank you, UrzaMaster. Thank you, Lord Uther, and thank you, Warp Core fans. Yes, we have reached the abbreviated end of our 5-year journey. We only made it through 3, and Star Trek would then take many strange twists and turns throughout the decades to come, but that's all in the future. For now, we're talking Turnabout Intruder. Turnabout Intruder was the last episode of the show on NBC or any network for a long time, back until 1987 when Star Trek The Next Generation premiered in syndication. So June 3rd, summer's just kicking off, hot and humid in 1969. But that's not when this show was originally scheduled to air. You will recall that the previous last episode of Star Trek aired on March 14th, 1969, and now we're talking June. So an over 2-month layoff. What went wrong? Well, this Turnabout Intruder was originally going to be aired on its usual time slot, Friday, March 28th, but then former U.S. President and World War II General Dwight D. Eisenhower died. And as a result, NBC decided to preempt Star Trek and go with what at the time was the CNN equivalent of round-the-clock coverage of Eisenhower's passing and relitigating his historical legacy and so forth. Now, the show was actually filmed in January of 1969. So if you think about that, they were in front of the cameras in January 9th of 1969 for this episode, and it was planning to air on March 28th. So again, only a couple of months between filming and then post-production and then on the air. Apparently, according to lore, and I don't mean anybody related to Data or his crazy inventor father, the crew was told, the cast was told, that they would not be getting picked up beyond this season during the production or just before the production of this episode. So what it sounds like is everybody knew in January that this thing had run its course. And it was going to air in March, but then Ike died. And so now we had to wait all the way till June. And I'm not sure when the network announced it. I think they waited until the final show had aired before they sent out the press release. But in any event, it was a stop and start, one step forward, 2 warp cores back. And everything just kind of felt a little bit disorganized and so forth. Hey, it was 1969, right? But in any event, this is how they went off. This was the send-off. It was directed by Herb Wallerstein. This was actually Herb's 4th season 3 directorial effort. He came on in season 3 and he got to do, a 6th of them. We first met him in the Tholian Web, and we covered that on Warp Core 74. Whom Gods Destroy, we covered that in Warp Core 79. And That Which Survives, we covered in Warp Core 82. So, and none of those episodes, quite frankly, were dishonorable or in any way shamed the legacy of Trek. They were all, in many cases, at least serviceable, if not pretty good, if you consider the Tholian Web as kind of one of the highlights there, and so forth. So that was Herb. The teleplay, we had a story by the great bird of the galaxy, Gene Roddenberry. The actual teleplay fell to Arthur Singer. Now, Arthur Singer was brought on as the story editor for the 3rd season, and he kind of replaced both DC Fontana and John Meredith Lucas, who had held the position before him, which means that he edited or rewrote 23 out of the 24 episodes of the third season. Never got any credit. They were mainly things like, this scene is too expensive, make it cheaper, or we have to shoot in this location, we need a shot, we need a thing of Kirk and McCoy in the jungle, write that, or etc. So he was the behind the scenes story editor / Mr. Fix-It for basically every episode, good or bad, of the third season. And his reward was to finally get on-screen credit for Turnabout Intruder, which was the last episode aired. So don't think of him as a one-hit wonder. He worked hard, sometimes not hard enough, on season 3, and that was Art Singer's contributions there. Gentlemen, the episode itself, I have to say, not giving it the baggage of being the last original Star Trek episode of its time to be aired, and just treating it as another brick in the wall, another Star Trek episode. And this one is pretty good. I think in particular, there's a standout trio of performances from the big three, as Lord Uther likes to call them. I think despite probably being maligned or poked fun at over the years, I think William Shatner had fully committed to the all of me, Steve Martin, Lily Tomlin body switching ask of this episode. And you can say what you will. It was if you wanted to see William Shatner just chewing it up, and a lot of people would tune in for that, or at least like to go back and make fun of it on YouTube videos. He gave us peak Shatner going for the gusto, right? This was Gary Oldman from The Professional or The Fifth Element, or this is early Gary Oldman, where nothing was sacred and he was chewing up the scenery. So I thought it was a good performance from Mr. Kirk, Captain. And I also thought that Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley were used very well here as their characters. Sometimes Bones would just get argumentative with Spock for no reason, or it just felt a little stagey. Sometimes Leonard Nimoy would retreat. He was never less than a consummate professional, but sometimes you could just tell that his heart wasn't in that particular storyline or whatever. Both of them delivered strong work. The three of them working together, I think, is the strength of this episode. I think my biggest critique, and I think we have to circle back to the story by Gene Roddenberry, is just the prevailing wisdom of the time. And let's remember, this is 1969. We have evolved in our public forward-facing pop culture. The idea that women are hysterical, I guess, and that's what ultimately undoes the former paramour of Kirk trying to take over the Enterprise and so forth. We've seen strong female performances. I mean, like legitimately strong. Like, why didn't they get them a Emmy? And I'm going to talk about one of those when we talk about our best and worst of the Star Trek overall. So I know it's possible, but I think the idea that Scotty and everyone's like the captain, he was hysterical, and then encouraging Shatner to really play that up. I think that was the only sort of sour note for me overall. Like, I didn't mind Shatner's performance. I just minded that was the writer's room male-centric sort of idea. Like, yeah, a woman, come on, she'd crack under pressure. She's, you can easily tell that that's not the real captain, because he would show such spine and steel. So that was my reading of it. I didn't like the context. I have to judge it on the context that we were getting in 1969. I understand, but I wasn't a fan of that. I think we could have had a woman female antagonist up to the task and not just go to pieces and and be shrieking and red-faced and all of that. That a little too demonstrative for my tastes. But again, that's a fairly minor quibble when you get that strong performances from the big three. And I also miss seeing Uhura. I don't know what Nichelle Nichols' production schedule was at the time. I'm sure she didn't call in sick or what have you, but it would have been nice to see the whole crew together there. In fact, you'd now have to go back and see which episode had everybody in it, from Chekhov and Sulu and Scotty and the whole thing there. That would be an interesting. It would be an interesting thing to put in the comments section, Warp Core fans. If you can go back and find the last episode where the entire crew gets screen time on NCC 1701. So gentlemen, they're swapping bodies again. What do we think of Turnabout?
I agree. I think it was a good episode. It's a little bit of a bummer that this is the send off for the series, so to speak, without being a send off of any kind. Yeah, the absence of Nichelle Nichols was deafening. This, Cadet Lucy or Ensign Lucy that just sort of shows up is like, what is Uhura on shore leave? Like, it was disappointing, especially because I think the rest of the crew who appears delivers a solid performance. I think George Takei and Walter Koenig do really well in this episode. Scotty was really good for his part that he played. I like that it was a trial episode, kind of returning to some of those roots of the show that were really successful. I love the idea of the body swap. I think that's a great sci-fi thing. I also like the whole idea of woman into man, man into woman, like swap to see how that would go. It's a fun play at any level and in any era. I agree, it's very 69-ish, but at the same time, I feel like it was a little bit dated thinking in 69 that a woman captain would just go hysterical and it was definitely overacted in the best way. It was very Kirky. The whole was fun. I liked it. I will say I think what defeated it a bit for me was at the end in the denouement where she's just like crying that she'll never be captain and I want you dead. Like, truly the hysterical hysterics that, if it was in the 50s that this episode got produced, I'd have been like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But this is deep in the era of I Love Lucy and a lot of the shows that kind of were changing the thinking around, how and who a woman is, let alone the fact that, the women's movement is really starting to pick up steam. This was really Roddenberry's chance to kind of, I think, challenge culture a bit. And this is a counterculture show, like it or not. But I think Gene Roddenberry gets a little too much credit because the episodes he writes tend to display some of the thought of the era, at least in this series. Thankfully, Next Generation, I think, challenges that, but that, I think, is more Rick Berman product than anything else. And the 80s were a different time, of course, but I got to hand it to this cast. It had to be very difficult to deliver a good performance on something you knew this was it. And then, to get pushed back so far and be like, oh yeah, we got this brand new Star Trek episode. By the way, it's the last one, so here you go. That's just kind of troubling as a fan. There were a lot of people who watched this after 3 years, I think, probably felt the disappointment that brought about things like the animated series and the demand for the movies. So, all things considered, it's solid sci-fi. It's good performances. It's just kind of sad. It's sort of sad to go out with no kind of send-off.
Yes. But let me pull some stats for you real quick. There were no less than 5 episodes where Kirk has his body taken over or he's switched out. There are, godlike episodes 17, where they go up against some unbelievable god, and that doesn't count machines.
Right.
Just so you know. How many episodes was the entire crew there? Out of the 79, ChatGPT is guessing only about 30 where they were all together. And the first appearance with them all together was Cat's Paw. What a waste.
Oh my God.
And the last episode, oh no, if you want to take the entire crew with Nurse Chapel, the Tholian Web was an episode that featured all of them at the same time.
Wow.
In Mirror Mirror, all 7 characters appeared for that one as well. So I just had to throw that out there. Because some of those tropes that we talked about that were overdone, I mean, we can see, like, there's some numbers for you right there. I kind of felt this episode was a rehash of that, which is why I wanted to find out how many episodes did Kirk lose his body, in a sense, or have it taken over. So there are some statistics for you. And yes, Shatner had his opportunity to totally ham it up. So how could you pass up on that? I don't know how he could. So with that being said, at least we got the movies, and at least it found a way to continue to move forward. Because I feel, so let me give you just a quick little comparison, and maybe this is way off, it just kind of hit me now. But you get 3 seasons, and then it goes away, and it's almost felt like Star Trek, possibility we could have lost it, right? Like, that could have been it if it wasn't for the fans writing in. And then it makes me think about Star Trek Enterprise. When that came to an end, short of what the 7-year run that they wanted, it almost felt like that was kind of the end for Star Trek, at least for an extended period of time, I don't think that really wound up happening, but it kind of felt that way. It's almost like, did it hit hit this valley where it wasn't going to be able to get out of it, right? And be able to turn it around, and luckily it did. And now we're seeing stuff like Strange New Worlds, which I feel, maybe we're at another spot here, right? Because Strange New Worlds, I feel, is just taking us into this incredible realm of Star Trek again. And then this new movie, which I have not seen, but we have been discussing, could be a low point. So it's like Star Trek gets stuck in these ruts where maybe Star Wars has as well, but it hits these low points and then makes a comeback. I mean, I guess we could say the same thing about the Acolyte and Skeleton Crew, which you can probably hear about in this amazing podcast called The Graying Jedi. Anyway,
I think I was discussing this with, I believe it was UrzaMaster. I think there's going to be a lot of attention, and rightly so, on this upcoming Starfleet Academy with Holly Hunter and others. This is a concept that Gene Roddenberry himself, when he was alive, was pushing hard for. And at some point, I think Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, was originally conceived as a Starfleet Academy film before they got their act together and did all that. So whether it was TV or the big screen, they've wanted to do that. I think when they were talking about it in the late 80s, they wanted to do just what basically the Kelvin timeline films did and give us a young Kirk and a young McCoy and a young Scotty and a young Uhura. But now this Starfleet Academy is, I believe it's set in the current, and by current I mean like the Discovery era and the Picard era. I think it's set in that era, just with a whole new cast of characters we have never come across before, allowing for cameos. Maybe Captain Riker or what have you pops in for a guest lecture and then has to take the kids out, a la Skeleton Crew, and save the universe. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea what they're doing. I just know that Strange New Worlds is a bona fide hit with the fan base, and Starfleet Academy will go a long way towards whether this is a peak or a valley, as Lord Uther points out. If Starfleet Academy face plants, then I don't know. Paramount, they may put it back into deep freeze for a while. But if it can connect with viewers and ratings and so forth, then, the sky's the limit.
Paramount, come here. Come real close, Paramount. Look, listen to me right now. Put all that aside. Picard take this crew, give me one last movie. Don't do this to me, Paramount. I don't want. I already saw Starfleet Academy in the video game in 1997. I don't need it now. I need Picard while he's still alive. So let's get this done. It's not going to be that big of a deal. You got 3 guys right here that can write the movie. So, Paramount, just don't do this. Don't. You've got Strange New Worlds. You're taking us to amazing places. Just give us the final Picard, please. Thank you, Paramount.
Not to mention Star Trek Legacy, which I think is an easy fit and would make such a great show. So, and it could run for 10 seasons, guaranteed. You'll never run out of stories with Star Trek, and you've got some incredibly talented writers on staff now at Paramount. And not to mention, I'm sure Terry Matalas would be like, yep, I'll do that. I'll make $5 million a year for the next 10 years to make Star Trek. Bargain bin, because that's going to cement a legacy of a director, writer, producer for life. And that's something you can't duplicate. We're still talking about Rick Berman. What's he done? You know, ate a sandwich? Like, I will say that when it comes to a Warp Core rating on this closure of Season 3, I struggled a bit to come up with my ratings, but we do have to give it Warp Core ratings. It is our tradition. And then we will wrap up by giving our tops and bottoms of Season 3. And I'm going to venture my Warp Core rating first. I don't often do this, but I'm going to give Turnabout Intruder a 5 out of 7 Warp Cores. I think this was a solid episode. It was reaching for greatness. Nichelle Nichols not being there hurt the episode.
I'm gonna put 5 on it as well. That everything that my fellow Starfleet members have said, I agree with. So, 5 out of 7. I loved that Kirk as a woman. I think we got a better, even though it was the hysterical side plot. I think that was a better performance than the female actress trying to do James Kirk. I didn't get as much Kirk from her as I got him, Shatner, emoting for the camera. So he did a better job playing a woman than she did playing Captain Kirk, in this humble opinion. But give it 5.
I'm giving it a 4, and that's because I used ChatGPT to look up the amount of episodes that he switched bodies, and I didn't like that. So I guess I'm taking it out of context because I'm doing it from today's perspective. But what a bummer. I mean, yeah, what a bummer. I wonder how you would. So I guess this is a question that we can kind of ponder a little bit. Like, how would you have ended this run with this crew? Like, what episode how do you end it? Because when you think about Next Gen, what a way to end a series. I mean, come on. And DS9, though I haven't seen it yet, which is my fault, but I'm purposely not watching it because I know we're going to get to that eventually. I've heard that's another great way to end a series. And then you had Star Trek Enterprise, which didn't end on such a good final series show, like episode there. So, how, something to think about. How would you have ended this run is kind of where we're at.
It's a great question.
Of course it's a great question. So everyone should post their great comments below.
Let us know below. How would you have closed out the series? To be honest, I don't think there's a great answer, because as good as the later show's endings were, and I even think Voyager's ending was great, I want movies. I think Star Trek 6 is the best way to close out, well, Star Trek 6 and Star Trek Generations is the best way to close out the story of Captain Kirk and this crew together. I think all our yesterdays probably could have had some kind of denouement that was like, now that we've sort of seen it all, it's time to return back to Earth and let them know, what it's like for a civilization to end or something like that. I think that would have been the episode, not to take anything away from Turnabout Intruder, that would have been the episode I might have added a couple scenes to as like a final mission situation, because I think it had that potential.
Yeah, I mean, it's just how people thought about writing. I mean, don't forget the modern cliffhanger way of ending a season to season, or all of this, the wrap up, it goes all the way back to Dallas and Who Shot JR. I mean, that before that, shows literally they just ended. Like, this is the last episode we're shooting. If we're picked up, we'll see you next month. Otherwise, have a great life. So I don't think the writers' room could have come up with like the big send-off that All Good Things was, or DS9 or Voyager. I just don't think that was something that was really in the cards. But it would have been nice. I mean, if we're going to look backwards, hindsight 2020, wouldn't it have been cool to kind of do what All Good Things was and kind of take us back towards the city on the edge of forever, right? Or the guardian of forever, like to somehow work in earlier episodes, basically, or Khan or whomever. It would have been interesting if they could have just kind of circled back around and maybe tied up the bow like we had with Q and Farpoint in All Good Things. Still one of the great television, like here's a way to put a bow on it and send the fans out happy. Regardless of what you feel about Generations or First Contact or Insurrection or Nemesis. I love Nemesis. I think All Good Things, most Star Trek Generation fans say, man, that was good. So playing poker, and everything was wild, and then the Enterprise D, heading off into the nebula. So, but anywho. All right, gentlemen. Let's put a bow on Star Trek, the original series, shall we? The best and the worst. Real quick, whether you went all the way back to 3 seasons or whether you just kept it here in the 3rd season, because the 3rd season was, it doesn't matter. As it turns out, my 2 picks were from the 3rd season. I thought there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in earlier shows we could have gone with, and standout foundational classic Hall of Fame TV from the original series. But for me, I think the best and the worst could be found right here in this erratic 3rd season. So let's do our bests first, whether it's, again, this season or the show. Mine was Warp Core 67, the Enterprise Incident. And you say to yourself, well, is that better than Mirror Mirror or The Trouble with Tribbles? Perhaps not, but in my original Warp Core ratings, I gave it 7 out of 7. It's the 2nd episode of Season 3, aired right after Spock's Brain, which divided fans and critics alike. It was written by D.C. Fontana. It was directed by John Meredith Lucas. It aired on September 27th, 1968. You will recall it's the one where Kirk makes himself up to be a Romulan, and Spock has to play a dangerous, flirtatious game with the Romulan commander, who gave that female performance that I was alluding to with Turnabout Intruder. She was smart, she was ruthless, but she also had feelings for Spock, genuine emotions, and the betrayal when she realizes that he has never strayed from his Starfleet roots was palpable. And I remember saying at the time that we said this, gentlemen, you could take this episode, put it in a bottle, serve it to someone who had never seen a Star Trek and say, this is what Star Trek is, with crew interactions, with the mission, with the writing, with the effects, all of it. This was the perfect, encapsulation of what they were trying to do for me. And so that's why it earned a perfect 7 out of 7. And while there are equally strong, if not even stronger episodes in the previous seasons, I think the Enterprise Incident would be a damn fine place to say, hey, you've never seen this show? Are you kidding me? Here, sit down and watch this for 45 minutes. So I'm going with the Enterprise Incident, Warp Core 67. We covered it. Be sure to check it out. That's my fave.
Uther?
Balance of terror has
Oh,
everything you want. Intrigue. We've got some spaceship battles, which we know how much Lord Uther loves those.
hmm.
To me, and I remember watching that. That was the episode I saw when I was younger that just totally dragged me in. So it holds a place near and dear to me because that's what got me started on Star Trek. To me, it's just, again, everything you want from Trek. Urza?
Love it. I'm going to give you my best and worst. I want to start with season 3. This is not my best overall, but I got to give a quick shout out to all our yesterdays. I thought that was a fantastic episode of Star Trek. There's definitely some season 3 bias there, so I couldn't call it my overall favorite. The worst, I think, was the Savage Curtain. That was just, I think that was my only 0 rating of the entire series. And that was just a couple of Warp Core episodes away. I think that was Warp Core 87. Just awful. I mean, you could totally skip that and you're not missing a thing. My best overall, and there's some real great ones, but I was so excited, and we covered this in Warp Core 59, for Return to Tomorrow. I really, really enjoyed that episode. Maybe I have a weird thing for Dr. Pulaski in Next Gen, but that episode just happened to be, I don't know, something special. And I know there's a lot of great picks. There's a lot of other episodes that are just like surprise hits with me. Assignment Earth, for whatever reason, was great. Even By Any Other Name was a good one. But Return to Tomorrow was just, I don't know, for me, it captured me. It wasn't the first Star Trek episode I fell in love with. I think you'd have to go all the way back to like Charlie X for that. But just, if you're going to watch it, there's these foundational episodes, and that's one of them.
Outstanding.
My worst alternative factor. I want my life back for that hour, and it can just factor its way out of this alternative Star Trek. Just Paramount, get rid of it, eliminate it from the timeline. It never happened.
Warp Core fans know how much Lord Uther loved/loathed the alternative factor. My worst for the show, and again, we did have some stinkers along the way. The apple is one that I railed on quite hard. Cat's Paw, for its missed opportunities to do a proper Halloween episode. So there were some misfires along the way. But the one where I truly, truly just did not want to finish watching the episode, I forced myself, saying, you've got to watch every minute of this show, was also from season 3. It was episode 10. It aired on November 22nd, 1968. We covered it in Warp Core 75. And it was Plato's Stepchildren, written by Meyer Dolinsky, directed by David Alexander. And people remember Plato's Stepchildren for the, at the time, controversial interracial smooch between Captain Kirk and Uhura. But I just remember we talk about how we appreciated Shatner's overarching performance in Turnabout, Intruder. Here, the entire cast riding Spock as like a horse, I believe, at one point, and the sheer obnoxiousness and annoyance of these characters that were tormenting them, these godlike characters again that Lord Uther brought up, like that one was a real problem for me. And I think literally coming in just a hair's breadth away was the Gamesters of Triskelion, for, as I said, making an off-screen assault of Uhura, even in suggestion, I just thought was a cheap narrative, so forth. Like taking an empowering female character and having her, the suggestion that she was somehow being assaulted / brutalized, that just, I never got over that in that episode there. But yes, Plato's Stepchildren, easily just the third season and the series as a whole had kind of driven into the ditch for that. Thankfully, we had some redemption, and we had some better times afterwards. But yeah, that for me was a nadir.
So, Warp Core podcast fans, we conclude Star Trek's original series run. We've had ups, we've had downs, but overall, this is the reason we're here, the NCC 1701. We say farewell to this crew. We've covered their movies, we've covered their series. Someday we'll get to that animated series, but we're going to leave you on edge for what we hit next. Could it be something new, something old, something in between? All we know is that we will, once again, go to where no one has gone before on the Warp Core podcast. Live long and prosper.